You're listening to the Max Planck Lawcast, which showcases the academic research currently being conducted across the Max Planck Law Network. I'm your host, Christopher Murphy, and together we'll be talking to some of the more than 400 researchers who are pushing the frontiers of legal knowledge in Germany and abroad. When it comes to new and exciting legal research, the Lawcast has you covered. Well, thank you very much for tuning in to the next episode of the Max Planck Lawcast. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about historical developments concerning the gender pay gap in Italy. Now, before you think that this sounds like a very niche topic, let me add that Italy was in fact a pioneer in the development of equal pay legislation and that its experience shaped future European law on the matter. We will also seek to ascertain whether this pioneering role has continued through to modern Italy or whether the proverbial wheels have somehow fallen off the carriage along the way. To do so, I'm joined in the studio by Nina Cozzi. Originally from southern Italy, Nina is currently a doctoral researcher at the Planck Institute for Legal History and Legal Theory here in Frankfurt. Nina, welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you on today. So we're going to talk a lot about the gender pay gap in Italy, but obviously that's going to require a little historical overview of what happened in, I guess, what we call modern Italy after the Second World War. Could you maybe give us a rundown of what the country looked like and also the political upheavals that followed after the end of the war?
Yeah, so the Italian situation after the Second World War was quite peculiar. So after the end of the Nazi-Fascist occupation, Italians had a huge choice to make because on the 2nd June of 1946, they had to vote if to keep the monarchy as a state form or if to go with the republic. And many Italian historians, most of them consider this as the breaking point with the past because the Italians finally voted for the Republic. And the fact that is really interesting to consider today is that the Republic won only for a few points over the monarchy.
Oh, okay. So it was a very close election.
Yes. And from a state that had been really going many years of fascist occupation, this is really surprising. But what is even more interesting for our topic is that finally women have a role in this new institutional form.
Okay. Have a role in which way?
So for the first time, along with this referendum, when the Italians chose between the Republic and the monarchy, it was also chosen that women could be elected to the so-called Constituent Assembly. This was an assembly which election happened along with this referendum, and this assembly would have served as the decision-making power in the new republican form.
Oh, okay. And that constituent assembly was then designed to decide how our new republic should look, basically.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
exactly this. Of course, Italy coming from years of monarchy and never having had republican form, this meant that really ground rules should have been set up, like how the parliament will work, how the government will be elected, how do we make all the political forces work together.
Okay.
So there were many things to be decided.
Yeah, sure. Well, there was obviously then a lot of political upheaval occurring at the time. When was the issue of equal pay first raised and by whom?
So institutionally, it was raised only when this Constituent Assembly started to work. So we are talking between the 46th and the 48th, but historically it was raised much earlier, even if in a clandestine manner. So during the resistance, so the years where the partisans joined in order to defy the Nazi-Fascism occupation, many women started to gather, women who were especially from the Communist Party, or even if not belonging to the Communist Party, let's say, identifying their ideals with communist ideas, started to gather in the so-called Women's Defense Group, that in Italian is Gruppi di Difesa della Donna. And these groups were basically fighting for women's right during the war. Of course, this couldn't be done in the open because of the fascist occupation, but they started at least making other women, especially women, working women, aware of the rights they could have.
Disseminating ideas.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And that was obviously not just about pay, but also rights in general then.
Exactly. Yeah. They started talking about, we could vote, or rather than, what about domestic work? And during my research, I found a lot of posters that that at the time, as I said, were clandestine, but now you can consult them in the archive where they show like, oh, women, let's gather to do this. Let's gather to talk about pay. Let's gather to talk about you don't need to be home. You could actually work.
Okay.
So this was basically how it went and where these first ideas were disseminated. And what I love about this history is that some of these women were the same who then sat in this Constituent Assembly.
Oh, some of them were elected to the
Yes.
Constituent Assembly. Okay.
So there was a total of 21 women elected in the General Assembly, this Constituent Assembly. But within this assembly, there was also something called the Commission of the 75. So there were these 75 people.
Got to make a lot of notes here with all these numbers.
Yes. It's a bit, tricky, but
So we got
I promise it will make sense.
Okay, very good.
So within this assembly, a decision was made to designate a specific commission for the drafting of the constitution, because one of the main decisions to make was, okay, how we detach ourselves from fascism, from a totalitarian state. And so the main idea was to write down a constitution that talked about, human rights principles, or maybe at the time they weren't called like that, but that's how I would call them today.
Yes.
And in this 75 commission, 5 women were elected.
Okay, right, okay. And then these 5 women, what made them stand out per se, and did they know each other previously? They were obviously politically active during the war years. Yeah, were they all members of the Communist Party?
No, mainly I would say, but there were also many Catholic women who identified themselves with the DC, the party that in Italian is Democrazia Cristiana, in English I would say probably the Christian Democrats Party. If I have to find a common factor between all of them, is that many of them were in exile during the war. Many of them were declared anti-fascists during the 20 years of Italian fascism. So already measures were taken against these women before because they fought for disseminating these ideas and so on. So they had, I think, this factor in common. Whether belonging to Communist Party or to more Catholic-shaped ideas, they had this in common. They were fighters of the regime.
Okay, right. And so what happens then when the Constituent Assembly, which we have the group of 21 with the 5 women as well, correct?
21 were all the women elected in the assembly.
21 were all the women elected in
Yes.
the assembly. Okay, right, okay. And so they meet and then they decide, right, we've been commissioned here with the drafting of a new constitution. How do we go about this?
Yeah, so that is also an interesting part I went through a few months ago, because luckily all the minutes of these Constituent Assembly meetings are accessible online. They have been digitalized and they are like, I don't know, 10,000 pages even.
Wow, yeah, I could
maybe
imagine.
more.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of work.
A lot of stuff to sift through. Yeah.
Yes. But what really stands out is that these women were quite united in, let's write down that we need equal pay. They weren't always on the same page about how to express this. And after so many back and forth and also a lot of negotiation with the men in the party, they managed to have this article written down. And what I love about this article is that it's the same as still today. It's the same words, same structure as in 1948 when the Constitution was promulgated. So it's the same, and you can see the communist touch and the Catholic touch. Some of the Catholic women really pushed for making clear that women had a main role, that was the maternal role, in the same article. So that's the tricky part.
Oh, okay. So it's also there we should have equal pay, but women their primary role is still maternal.
Yes.
Okay. Was that somewhat there was a clash between, for instance, the Communist Party and then the Catholic parties?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that the communist women, and I must say also the communist men in the party, were really supportive in general of the idea of equal pay and stating, okay, women must have equal pay for work of equal value. But this addition, that it's the second part of the article, is looking backwards, of course, painful today to read.
Right, okay, sure.
Yeah, but it basically says...
politics, I guess, the need for a compromise.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so they were kind of agreed on the same goal, but it was how we should reach there and exactly what we should put in the Constitution was where there was a little
tricky, I would say. And of course, at the time, there were even communist women themselves who pushed for this, even if the main push came from the Catholics. I mean, it's not that surprising considering that it was almost 100 years ago.
Sure.
And as much as these women were not related to fascism at all, the opposite. Fascism had really pictured women as, in Italian you say, angelo del focolare. That means literally an angel, that is the woman, staying in front of the fireplace, looking at it.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Just, a very bad similitude to say, stay home, take care of the kids.
Yes,
So this was the general scenario.
So a homemaker role,
Yes.
Okay.
So this compromise in the end, if I imagine myself in 1946, I would say, great.
Sure.
Let's go for
Let's go with it.
Yeah,
That's right. We can leave the second passage. It's not that important. We've got the first passage.
Yes.
Okay. Don't go away, because we're going to have plenty more for you after this short break.
Allow us to introduce you to the wealth of information found on the Max Planck Law website. Discover a range of events, from researcher-led presentations and reading groups to workshops and conferences, many of which are open to the public. Keep up to date with our news, explore the tangible impacts of our research, and peruse Perspectives, our online publication offering insightful articles on current legal issues. And of course, for those looking to pursue a PhD or postdoctoral research, you will find everything you need to know about our many academic opportunities. Visit our website today, law.mpg.de.
Welcome back to the Lawcast. Thanks for listening to us today. The fact that there was even talk then, though, about the requirement or the need for equal pay, I guess that's what it was called then, the gender pay gap, I think is something new, as was equal pay, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Meant that there was obviously a reasonable amount of women in the workforce at the time in Italy. You were able to break that down percentage-wise to maybe how many women were employed, at least at that time, shortly after the Second World War?
So percentage-wise, I've been checking numbers, and a round number is that during the Second World War, around the 40% of the workforce was women.
That's extremely high.
Unfortunately, it doesn't really give us a perfect picture because we have to consider that many women were called into factories. Put it very simple, because their husbands, their brothers, their fathers were sent to the front. So some of these women just had to go. There was another choice. So the thing, unfortunately, we don't know is if we took these numbers out, how many women actually would be working.
Actually voluntarily working of their own volition. Okay,
Yeah. But already at the beginning of the century, there were many women working, not the 40% of the workforce, but it was a thing as much as in the previous centuries. It's just that I think the war changed the modality and regularity of women's work. They started to access occupations that were previously considered male occupations, like heavy work in the factories and so on. And it's also the years of the boom, economic boom of the textile industry. So
post-war now we're talking.
During the war
during
and
the war
post-war.
and post-war, okay.
Yes.
Okay, and so then the Constituent Assembly met and they ended up drafting and passing the Constitution. What is the article we're actually talking about?
It's Article 37.
Article 37,
yes.
Okay, and that's where the equal pay is kind of codified, if you will.
Yes.
Okay, right.
It's defined as a principle in the Constitution.
As a principle, okay.
Yes.
Great. We've got wonderful movement in the books. What about on the ground? The legal books say now women have to be paid equally. I assume this wasn't previously happening. What did employers make of the new rule and how did they react to it? Yeah, they were obviously vital for Italian industry at the time, the female workforce. Yeah. What did the employers say?
Yeah, that's been another, let's call it painful part to write about, even if very interesting. So in what we can really see from documents and from books of the times is that women's struggle for equal pay never stopped. And this for me was like a huge red flag saying, but why? I mean, it's in the Constitution. The Constitution is our, I don't know how to say exactly in English, but I would say maybe our supreme source of law. There's nothing above the
Nothing above
constitution.
the sure.
So I was wondering, like, oh, this is possible.
Yeah.
I knew it wouldn't be a magic instrument, this equal pay in the constitution, but I thought the situation would be better after the constitution. This didn't happen. So this, I'm going to the archives soon to find about what these employers said about this, like what happened, how they did react. I will check the archives of Confindustria, that it's, in English, I would say I think it can be translated as General Confederation of the Italian Industry. And it basically collects all the documents related to what the employers did relating to working matters.
I see. And that would be instance, might be documentation about, we've got this new law here. How are we going to deal with it?
Yes.
Do we ignore it? Do we apply it? Do we do something in between?
Exactly. And how can I say, practically implement it?
Okay.
Do we just walk in tomorrow and raise all the women's salaries? These kind of things. I can't give you straight answers yet because, as I said, I have to go to the archives, but I have an hypothesis.
Yeah, sure.
That employers didn't react very well. I mean, as I said, this hypothesis comes mainly from the fact that if these women who sat in the Constituent Assembly kept on fighting, there are many books, many documents saying, let's gather and make sure that this constitution really works. I guess this shows that they didn't really raise these salaries for women.
Okay. We were talking about numbers, percentages and the like. Did the number of women working in the workforce then decrease after these passages passed?
Yeah, so there has been a huge decrease in numbers of women working. Unfortunately, this is the same, as I said before, for how many women were working. There's not really a perfect instrument or perfect, way to calculate how many women left and why they left. One hypothesis is that they left because when the war ended, they just went back home, let's say so. Because
to the fireplace in Italian terms. Yeah.
Exactly, to the fireplace, to watch over the fireplace. Many scholars also argue that this actually was due to the fact that education levels increased after fascism. Others say that maybe this depended on the fact that, women wanted to go to university, were more involved in political activities. So the decrease could be really, unfortunately, related to many factors.
Okay, it's rather hard to pin down exactly why. It may have been to do with the legislation being passed and the fact that women would have to be paid equally, but it could have also been to do with the fact that maybe a lot weren't there voluntarily in the first place. And obviously you have a lot more men returning from war, coming back and filling the jobs that the women had previously been doing.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
I would say so. And one way I will try to make these numbers more precise, more accurate, is that I will try to also check the archives of the Italian National Statistic Office to see if there has been actually a difference in women's salaries, because they report on salaries.
Okay.
So
a divergence then between what they were previously paid and what they were then paid thereafter, or what do you mean by that?
Yes, exactly. So I want to see if, let's say, by comparing a woman's salary in the textile industry in 43 or whenever before the Constitution, if comparing it to the 1950, let's say.
I see. Okay.
If this salary actually raised.
Right. And I guess you could also then obviously see for men if their salary had raised as well.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Which is important.
Because of course, Italy coming from a pretty disastrous situation in complex industry, in the industry complex and so on, there are many factors that can affect salaries, like living costs, new resources, a new government, a new republic.
Okay, yeah. So, a lot of, as we said before, a lot of political upheaval, societal and political upheaval. Yeah. Wow, it's going to have your work cut out for you pinning this one down. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the consequences of the law, because we're not just looking at what happened in 1946, 47, we're looking a little bit later on as well. I gather this has kind of gone to courts a few times, discussions about gender pay and equal pay. Are there any case examples or particular pertinent judicial findings about the matter?
Yeah, so there are two that come to my mind. And the way I found these court cases is really, I don't know, funny, let's say. Yeah. because I wanted to see how the newspapers at the time announced equal pay, like was it really taken into consideration by the public opinion and so on. And while digging into these newspapers, I found one from 1963, so more than 10 years after the Constitution, talking about first case about equal pay in northern Italy. Finally, a judge announces that equal pay must be enforced and so on. And this was a shock for me because I was like, is it possible that no equal pay cases went to court before? So I went to find this court case. As I said, it's from the 1963, and basically a woman working in an industry complex in northern Italy went to court saying, hey, my employer is not corresponding to me the same salary as my men colleagues. And the ratio of the judgment, it's something else, I would say, because the reason that the employer gives to the judges to the question why you're not paying women the same as the Constitution is there and is telling you to do so is, but in a collective agreement that has been enforced years before in 1960, it actually has different salaries provisions for women and men.
Oh, okay. So a collective bargaining agreement that they'd made at their workplace, and they said this is totally okay, and the women had agreed to this, or...
Yeah, that's what I was shocked about, because I was like, wait, who agreed to this? So I digged more and I went back to find this collective agreement, and it literally shows like what today would be an Excel table with saying like men, they earn, let's say, 50 euros per hour, let's say. Women, 46 or something like this. And this was very shocking. And yes, there were women in these commissions, and I think this was even more proof for me that they really had to fight for this. They really didn't get this equal pay immediately. Mm-hmm. But I would say luckily the judge declared the clause of this agreement void. Okay. And the funny, if we want to call it so, finding is that he says to the employer that he must correspond all the missed salary difference to the women for the previous years.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
Fair enough, though. I mean, okay. But that obviously shows that there was maybe not so much control then of we have the provision, Article 37, but the fact that they could get away with drafting their own agreement that clearly runs opposite to what's stipulated there by the law shows, seemingly a lack of supervision.
Yeah, and, the problem is that collective bargaining moments, let's say so, were not always going the right direction. Sometimes, maybe I think women had to sacrifice something else, like, let's say, less hours working, even if we are paid less, because, as much as we talk about equal pay, we still have to think it was the 50s, the 60s, women still were seen as the, mothers, wives. So many of them were absolutely happy to work, but at the same time, they had to reconcile this with their family life, let's call it so. So I think they really had to bargain most of the times.
Okay, right. Sure. To get a foot in the door, so to say, that there was so many men had returned, and then those who wanted to work had to say, oh, okay, we might have to accept.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
We work, but it doesn't matter if we earn a bit less,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And we also have to consider that, the Constitution was something really new as a concept in general. Like, if you go today to law school, you are taught that this is the most important
So it's like then Law 101, the Constitution, and now, because of course we were talking about obviously, a working class as well, and maybe it hadn't been promulgated so well as one had hoped,
And today we worship the Constitution in law school and we love it and we're so happy about it. But I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of, 20, 30, 40 years old woman coming from the working class who probably didn't even have the chance to go to school. Mm-hmm. Like, did she really know how much power this Constitution gave to her? I don't think so.
No, that's a valid point. You said there was a second case that you wanted to talk about, or you found?
Yes, it's actually it happened prior to the 1963 case, but I left it for second because, so this happened in 1958, and it is a court case where the Court of Cassation, that is like our Supreme Court, probably I would say in English, decides over the interpretation of norms on the national territory. So what I found out is that the Court of Cassation exactly said how this principle should be interpreted. And my question was like, was there even a need? I mean, the text is pretty simple, like
Right, fairly straightforward. What's
there's
written
equal
there?
pay. Yeah.
Equal pay, yeah.
But apparently this wasn't enough for employers, so something like this was needed. And what, in two sense, the Court of Cassation says is this principle is enforceable immediately. It doesn't need additional laws. It doesn't need additional implementation. You basically have to respect it. It is what it is.
It is what it is. That's right. Yeah.
And I find it interesting because still it shows that, 1958 this happened, and 1963 the court case I talked about before. So things were really tricky, I think, to really get into practice.
Yeah, certainly. That's right. For us common lawyers, it's easy to go and look at find a case to look at. They're all there in lots of colourful or not so colourful groupings of books on the wall, hundreds and thousands of them probably when you go into a library. How is it for you in Italy, for instance? You said you found about these cases in the newspaper. Are they available online to look at?
This is one of those cases where I'm extremely jealous of the common law students or researchers, because for us, no, it's not the same. So I could access the rush of the judgment, but I cannot read about the whole case. It's not accessible online. It hasn't been digitalized. So the only option you have is literally either call the court and say, hey, could you please let me dig into your archive?
Right. Yeah.
If they kept it, if they, I don't know, it's in, let's say, tidy enough to dig into it. So this is the really tricky part.
Oh, okay. Right. So this will mean going into a archive of a court, and this court could be anywhere. We don't quite know if it's even there, and getting dusty and dirty and trying to find this case.
Yes.
From a good 50, 60, 70 years ago.
Yeah. At least to have, a complete idea of the case. Yeah. But unfortunately, this is the way it is done. You can really access a lot of, final decisions, but not the whole text.
Okay.
Like what exactly, for example, this woman complained about.
So the facts of the case you don't have them there?
No.
Okay, right, no. I see.
I could reconstruct them a bit intuitively through the decision, but I'm not sure exactly what this woman complained about, how much of a lowest salary she received and so on.
Okay. Is this something you're actively trying to do, to go and find cases of this nature in archives?
Yes.
Yeah.
I already had a lot of emails with these courts, and luckily most of them are really actually happy when you research about these old cases. So but of course it requires me going to Italy. So it's taking...
a lot of our listeners will be like, oh, wow.
Lucky she goes to Italy.
To go to Italy.
Yes. Even if it's around the corner,
Yeah, that's right.
It takes time. And Italy is nice. Sun and food, but this is a lot of work.
That's a lot of work. Okay, you're obviously not going to be seeing so much sun because you're going to be hanging out in archives. Oh, right. Okay, I see. Oh, dear me. Well, you'll have to definitely inform us about those adventures in a
I would
future
be happy
podcast. But before we lose you to an Italian archive, I'd like to jump ahead now a few decades along, and I'd like to ask how Article 37 affected the drafting of the laws on the equal pay in the EU.
Yeah, so this will be the second part, I would say, of my research, the one that I still didn't actually do, but I plan on doing. From my previous reading, what I realized is that actually Italy really, as you mentioned, actually was a pioneer. And this had an impact on EU law. Surprisingly enough, I have to go back to the commission and those women who were elected. And one of them, she was called Nilde Iotti. She really had a prominent role in the European process of implementing, for example, the Equal Pay Directive and so on. So all the equal pay legislation from the 70s, 80s from the European community. So
it was kind of invited by the European community as an advisor, so to say.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly still because I have to check, as I said, the archive sources and the old documents. But what I know is that at the time she had one of the most active role in the Italian parliament at the time. She was the first woman to be elected and to really stay longer into this role of the president of chambers, I would say, probably in English. So She was a communist.
Okay.
She was one of those who took part into the resistance. She was one of those who drafted Article 37.
So she had a very, very long lineage of dealing with the question of equal pay.
So I really want to see how she spoke about it, how much of the drafting process of Article 37, and if it somehow went into, or it shaped the first Equal Pay Directive in the 75. Yeah, I think so, but I would have to check.
To be found out once you get back from that archive. Go to another archive. And how then, okay, we've talked a little bit, obviously, we assume that there was definitely some kind of influence then from the situation in Italy, because particularly it was a pioneer on the issue of equal pay.
Yes.
How did the boomerang come back then? We had the Equal Pay Directive decided by the European Commission. How did that then interplay with Article 37 of the Italian Constitution?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, Italy, despite having already Article 37, many collective agreements, many succeeding laws, implemented all of the European directives. And so the Equal Pay Directive in 75 or the ILO Equal Remuneration Article, so it implemented everything. I don't think it had, how can I say, like an impact, of course, on the Constitution, because, again, it's the supreme source and so on. But I think it pushed the practical implementation.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, in the end, when I digged into these old court cases, I realized that the more the time went on in the 70s, the more frequent was for me finding in the rush of the judgments a judge saying, yeah, there is Article 37, and let's not forget that there are also international agreements. There are also, at the time, EC directives, the ILO Convention.
It was more impetus to make sure these laws are finally applied correctly.
Yeah, I think judicially especially, it was a big push for the implementation of Article 37. So I would say it really helped on a pure legal basis, yes.
Certainly. Then, okay, we've got the Article 37, and we have then the EU Directive on Gender Pay Gap. I guess my final question then would be, how do things look today in Italy? Pioneering role. What is the situation on the ground at the moment?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is a sad point, because from a country that has such a long history dealing with equal pay, you would expect a much better situation. Unfortunately, the gap is still high, especially in the private sector. It is not as high as in other EU countries, but it's still really high. And apart from the gap, what really struck out as problematic is that the legislation is not that updated. And of course, I'm not talking about the Constitution. I'm talking about, let's say, ordinary legislation. So if we look at all those law fields that have an impact on equal pay, let's take family law. So I'm talking about, for example, parental leave. Let's talk about tax law. And I'm meaning the way women and men are taxed when they're married and all that difficult field I'm not that into. But all these fields, all these legislations are not really updated. The parental leave in Italy is quite bad. So women have months compared to men who have like around 10 days, if I recall correctly, from the last legal implementation a few years ago. So it's not...
So there's even not an equality there in the other way around as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, as I said, all these things have a huge impact on equal pay. They really make the gender pay gap bigger. And yeah, that's unfortunately not great.
No, not at all. Definitely some sobering thoughts on the way to end the podcast. But Nina, I wish you all the very best. Maybe your work will help to contribute to making the society more aware of this issue.
I hope so.
So don't get lost in an Italian archive.
Yes.
Please do come back. Please finish the publication. And I'd love to have you back on the podcast again in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Lawcast. If you'd like more information about Max Planck Law, or if you'd like to get involved, please visit us at law.mpg.de.
Max Planck Law. Excellence in legal research.